Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for joining us and welcome to this Bluetongue virus update webinar and Q&A session. Today is an opportunity for you to hear Bluetongue updates from our industry experts and also put forward any questions you might have about Bluetongue. My name is Zoe Lloyd and I'm going to be your chair for this evening. I'm an animal health and welfare scientist at AHDB. I'm also delighted to be joined today by our speakers. Firstly, we'll be hearing from Steve Jackson, who is the Head of Animal Disease Policy for Welsh Government, who will be going through some of the recent updates to the Welsh policy and an overview on Bluetongue. We will then move on to Laura Stephen, who is a Clinical Director at the Isle Veterinary Group and is also a beef farmer with her own herd at home, who is going to talk us through some of her in-practice experiences as a vet from a beef perspective. And then we're going to move across to Fiona Lovett, who is a sheep vet from Flock Health Limited, who is going to share some of her findings and experiences from a sheep perspective, as well as helping us to address the importance of timely vaccination and some of the misinformation out there about Bluetongue and the vaccines. We are also delighted to have Gordon Hickman, who is the Head of Exotic Disease Policy from DEFRA, who will be joining us to help with the Q&A session at the end too. If I could have the next slide, please. Just to cover off a few housekeeping points before we get started, this webinar is being recorded and the link will be circulated within 24 hours to those who have signed up. If you experience any technical difficulties today, please know that the recording is being shared, so you will be able to watch it back. It will also be uploaded onto YouTube, so you are able to share with anyone who may have missed to tune in live. We will begin, as I said, with an update of the current Bluetongue situation and policy from Steve Jackson, then move on to hearing insights and experiences from Laura Stephen, then Fiona Lovett. Please note, if you would like to record your CPD for this webinar, you are very welcome to scan the QR code there in the corner, and this will hopefully make it a little easier for you to record. There will be the opportunity at the end to answer questions, so please do put your questions in the chat box at the top right-hand side of your screen. Here there should be a speech bubble with a question mark in it. At the end of the webinar, you will get the option to complete a feedback form where you can inform us of questions and topics you're interested in. We would really appreciate it if you could spare 2 minutes to fill this in. It really helps inform us of what you'd like to hear more of. And please do keep an eye out on the Ruminant Health and Welfare and AHDB websites for future webinars also. Right, without further ado then, we will move on to our first speaker today, and this is Steve Jackson. Unfortunately, we have experienced some technical difficulties, so we only have audio, but I will now hand over to Steve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zoe. Can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And yeah, apologies for my slightly unusual way of joining today. And it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you about the Bluetongue situation in Wales. So I think I'll kick off with a little update on cases, and then hopefully move into a bit of background to why we introduced disease restrictions in Wales. I'll tell you a little bit about the friction between disease controls and, the need to facilitate markets and trade. And then I'll move on to our plans for future movements policy as we come into the low transmission period. And I'll conclude then with a little bit of info on what we would do in an outbreak in Wales, and give you a few quick conclusions and observations from my perspective, which hopefully will be useful. So if we could move on to the first slide with the map on it, please. So hopefully you can see the slide with a map of England and Wales with the RZ coloured in sort of pink. So basically, as I understand it, we now have 18 confirmed cases in England since the 10th of July this year. I'm sorry my map doesn't have all the 18 on it. It hasn't been updated yet, but it does serve to show that from a Wales perspective anyway, the disease is coming close to the borders in Hereford and in Staffordshire, and possibly in some of the other cases that I didn't get a chance to update yet. So Wales is obviously shown as white because, touch wood, we're still a free area. As I understand it, and Gordon may have more to say about this at the end, but there have been some severe clinical cases observed in sheep, and I believe all the cattle cases have been detected by pre-movement testing. Obviously, because cattle don't show symptoms as much as sheep. Turning then to kind of the vaccination status in Wales. So the figures I've got were up to sort of noon today, and we're somewhere close to 212,000 vaccinated animals, which 136,000 of those being cattle and about 73,000 sheep, with some 300 odd camelids and approaching 2,000 goats. So that's the latest figures on the vaccine recording system at the moment. That's what vets have reported. And you'll notice that keepers have reported vaccination of 127,000. So there's a bit of an anomaly there between vet reports and keeper reports. And that's slightly concerning to us because our plans for relaxing movement restrictions for vaccinated animals really will rely on keepers reporting vaccination of animals, and it's our plan to have a general license condition around having vaccinated your animal and having recorded it to be allowed to move it into Wales. So I think we do need to think about anything we can do to encourage keepers to report vaccination as timely as possible, really, because I know they probably all intend to, but they haven't got around to it yet, and you know it may cause a problem if they wish to move a vaccinated animal in the future. So could we move on to the next slide, please? So I just said I would give a little bit of background as to why we introduced movement restrictions, and you know why we didn't align with the RZ in England. So the feeling in Wales was that movement restrictions were required, you know, in June and July to protect the health and welfare of Welsh stock and farm incomes, and most importantly, I think, to allow additional time for vaccine take-up by producers in Wales. The type of restrictions we introduced were movements from the RZ to slaughter was only allowed at designated abattoirs. So these were ones that had confirmed to APHA and FSA that they had proper vector controls and mucking out and lairage controls and things like that in place. Then moves to live from the RZ were subject to specific license and a pre and or post move, pre or post, I should say, move test as appropriate. And we also decided to allow cattle that were fully vaccinated with Bluetongue 3, so that's the 2 doses and the 21 days for the onset of immunity, to move without any pre-movement testing, but they would still only be able to move under a specific license. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. Those controls were obviously welcomed by some sectors of industry, but not by everybody. So it's fair to say that when they were announced by our Deputy First Minister, he made a commitment to keep the policy and the restrictions under review and to act in the light of any new or emerging evidence, and also to look across GB at the evolving disease picture to see if there was a case for either increasing or decreasing the level of restrictions we had. The other kind of fora that we used to inform our animal movement policy development were the regular ministerial roundtables. They were chaired by the Deputy First Minister, and they were held with the livestock and veterinary sectors, and all interested parties and all participants at those roundtable meetings had an opportunity to speak, and it was quite well choreographed. So, everybody who attended representing a particular organisation got an opportunity to have their voice heard directly by the Deputy First Minister, and not through the filter of the civil service or anything else that concerns vets or industry, really. And then on a more kind of practical and operational level, the CVO chairs regular kind of working group level meetings with industry to share our latest policy thinking and to collect some feedback on it and ground truth, whether it's practical or not. So those are our kind of avenues that we use to inform our policy development. So next slide, please. So as I said, there was friction between the introduction of restrictions to protect animal health and welfare, incomes, etc., and industry's need, genuine need to move animals and to trade. And the recent feedback we've been getting from industry is restrictions may be as damaging economically as Bluetongue. So movement relaxations are required, particularly as we approach the autumn sales and farmers are under pressure to restock and to source breeding stock. So in light of these kind of tensions and in light of industry feedback, we realized we needed to introduce some risk-based relaxations, and they were introduced incrementally, and as I say, evidence-based, risk-based. So the first ones were to support the food business operators, the abattoirs, and the supply chain for the abattoirs through markets. So they were approved red markets for selling livestock from the RZ, destined for slaughter in designated abattoirs in Wales or any abattoirs in the RZ. And that relaxation came in on the 14th of July, so a fortnight after the All England RZ was declared. And then we introduced on the 18th of August, so Monday basically, what's called specified sales, and that means markets can operate in the RZ within 20 kilometres of the border with England for vaccinated Welsh animals, and those animals can return to Wales once they're sold. So that was kind of the beginning of the journey, and that's what's in place at the moment in terms of trade facilitation and relaxation of restrictions. But we realise, that's not enough, and industry have told us that is not enough with the autumn sales approaching. So our plans for future movement policy are outlined in this slide now, and you're probably getting the premiere airing basically of these plans I plan to tell Livestock Core Group tomorrow afternoon, but I thought there's no point in delaying, making our thoughts available and publicising them to you as soon as we can. So I guess the first thing to say is, we've gone at this in a sort of a partnership approach. Industry have told us that they accept that relaxing restrictions will bring the disease to Wales. And animal movement restrictions are a powerful tool still in preventing the disease moving into Wales. That's not to say midges couldn't come across the border and carry the disease, but to date that hasn't happened, and we hope that the restrictions we put in place have stopped it coming across to date. So industry is acknowledges, I guess, that there's a very, very high risk of disease. We will probably end up with disease, but the benefits for moving animals and trade facilitation outweigh those risks. From our perspective, to try and mitigate the impact of the disease, Welsh Government thinks that vaccination is a key way to unlock animal movements. So we want to allow animal movements, but the stipulation is they should be vaccinated animals, particularly if they're going to move under a general license. So again, I think we will introduce a wider range of relaxations as we approach the onset of the low transmission period. So from the 21st of September, all fully vaccinated animals will be able to move to Wales to live. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So basically what that means is markets in the ORZ and in Wales will be allowed to sell vaccinated ORZ livestock into Wales under a general licence. So those animals can move to Wales and they can stay there because from the 21st of September, we believe we will be in the low transmission period for Bluetongue. So we believe the virus should no longer be able to undergo the incubation period in midges, newly infected midges at least, from that date. So the other kind of relaxation that we're planning is Welsh markets can sell vaccinated ORZ livestock and unvaccinated Welsh livestock together at the same sale. Before that, we had kind of planned for dedicated sales for vaccinated livestock, but recent risk assessments and discussions with industry, livestock auctioneers association, and people like that have convinced us that the risk is not from the market or the sale. It's more from the livestock, and it's not really the kind of disease that livestock can pass to each other without the vector. So it's acceptable from a risk perspective then to allow vaccinated and unvaccinated Welsh livestock to mix at sales. We also intend to allow direct farm-to-farm moves of vaccinated livestock from the ORZ to Wales, also under the same general licence. And from the 21st of September, we will also drop the abattoir designation requirements. So all abattoirs will then be able to keep stock in the lairage overnight, and they won't need to have active ventilation like they did during the active transmission period for Bluetongue. So that's our plans. As I say, you've got the premiere sort of viewing this evening. So what do we expect in terms of impacts from those relaxations? So I'm afraid it's not a rosy picture. I think, next slide, please. I think we accept that government and industry that taking livestock, even vaccinated livestock, from the RZ where disease is circulating will allow infection into Wales. And vaccination, other than Bluetongue 3 in cattle, only reduces viremia. It doesn't prevent it in vaccinated stock. And any relaxations like removing the requirement for pre-movement tests in vaccinated stock will increase the risk of Bluetongue to livestock across Wales, regardless of location. So we're not just talking about the Welsh marches and the border areas where there's a risk from midge transmission, but we're also now talking about the western coastal counties and things like that because of potentially viremic animals moving or infected animals moving. The other thing I guess to bear in mind is you saw our vaccination figures there around 212,000. That's pretty low, and that means basically the majority of livestock in Wales are not protected against the clinical impacts of the disease. And I guess the 18 confirmed cases across England, together with increasing movements from the RZ to Wales, will increase the risk of incursion to Wales significantly. So next slide, please. So I think it's fair to say that we expect to get Bluetongue. So how would we deal with it? And I guess the answer to that is we would aim to eradicate it in the first instance, but the strategy may vary depending on the location of where we find the disease and whether that disease is circulating locally. Our cases last August were in livestock moved from the RZ to Wales. So, we identified them, we culled them quickly. I think it was 2 or 3 rams, and we conducted epi-analysis, and it basically showed that the disease wasn't circulating in Wales. It was just present in those moved livestock, and we eradicated the disease by culling those livestock as quickly as we could. So I guess, scenarios then, if the disease is circulating in the border areas of Wales, along the marches, Powys, border, things like that, and RZ could potentially protect the western counties, we would need to look at it on a kind of case-by-case basis. But I think it's fair to say if Bluetongue begins circulating in the western coastal counties in 2025, we have lost the battle. And I think we have a report case in Ceredigion, Cardiganshire and Old Money. So let's hope that's not positive, or I think that will be the beginning of the end of Bluetongue control in Wales, really. So I said at the start I would offer a few conclusions and observations, from my perspective, from a Welsh Government perspective, which may or may not be useful and may or may not be interesting to you. So next slide, please. So basically, conclusions: Bluetongue is a devastating disease potentially, and only vaccination really can mitigate the clinical, reproductive and productivity impacts of it. Relaxation of movement controls increase the cumulative risk of Bluetongue entering Wales, and the more movements we have, the greater that risk is, because the risk is lower for 10 animals than it is for 100 animals, than it is for 1,000 animals, etc. So I guess it's also important to note that, you know, the fact that you're attending this webinar tonight and your ongoing engagement around the threat of Bluetongue and its impact is very, very welcome and heartening from our perspective as we try to control it. One of the questions, though, that does strike me is, as I said, we are kind of preparing now as government for Bluetongue to enter Wales and, you know, looking at our contingency plans on that. But I just wonder, are producers and the sector as a whole prepared for potentially severe clinical disease? Are you ready to manage sick animals? Have you thought about how you'll treat them, or whether you will euthanize sort of severe cases immediately rather than, you know, prolonging the disease in welfare cases and things like that? I think probably everybody needs to think along those lines in Wales now, because, you know, the risk of it entering Wales is moving to pretty high. I guess the other thing to say is, you know, encouraging farmers and vets to discuss vaccination and maintain vigilance and report cases is still super important, certainly to us in Wales. And finally, I suppose a couple of provocative things for longer term. You know, will double dosing of sheep or administering boosters, you know, be useful to disease control and managing the impact in the longer term? I think there's some evidence emerging from the Netherlands on double dosing sheep, and clearly we will find out more about the you know, the booster schedules and things like that for vaccinations as the vaccine manufacturers get more information on their products. So last slide, please. So that concludes it from me. I hope I haven't gone too far over time. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much, Steve, for that update from Welsh Government there. I'm sure there will be a few questions on the recent changes to policy you detailed there, particularly as we approach some of the breeding sales, as you mentioned, but we will cover off questions at the end. I would now like to move across to Laura, please, who is going to talk about some of her experiences and findings from a beef perspective. So thank you very much, Laura.
Hello, thanks very much to Zoe for asking me to speak today and for the introduction. So I've worked in large animal practice in East Anglia for the last 20 years at Isle Veterinary Group, predominantly with beef cattle, both suckler and finishing units. Also, with my husband and two daughters, we run our own suckler herd of about 100 cows, mainly Aberdeen Angus, plus followers. And most of our sales from them are breeding, bull sales, selling pedigree and recipient heifers, and I do a lot of AI and embryo work as well. So concerned about the effects of Bluetongue from both a veterinary and a personal aspect. Next slide, please. In our work within East Anglia, we have seen mainly non-clinical signs in cattle, but of the clinical signs that we've seen, they have been such as the images here, so mucous membrane ulceration, and particularly ulceration on the inside of the gums behind the teeth there, and the occasional coronary band inflammation. But in the main, the most predominant issues that we've seen have been with fertility. So starting back in autumn 2024, our first cases were reported at the beginning of September, and autumn scanning, October, November 2024, we saw unusually high numbers of empty cows, and where bulls were subsequently semen tested, many of those bulls were sub or infertile, some of which had tested completely fine at the beginning of the breeding season. We also saw a higher than usual fetal loss at approximately 4 months gestation, particularly in large groups of cows that were scanned, where we'd seen many embryos that had just died inside the cow and were still sat there. The cattle subsequently got rid of them. And additionally, where farms were doing embryo work, and we had a higher than usual rate of unfertilized embryos, and some of these farms went on to have active Bluetongue infection at the time of the embryo flushing. So strong anecdotal evidence that the Bluetongue was severely affecting fertility. Moving on to winter 2024, pregnancy loss higher than expected. This is going to our own farm, where we tend to scan September time and then rescan them in January when we blood test prior to calving early spring, and not huge numbers of pregnancy losses, but higher than expected. There's also been lots of reports of abortion in the eastern regions, although that's not something that I have personally been affected by, but really quite dramatic effects across lots of herds, especially where bulls have just completely stopped working. Moving on to spring, the main, next slide please. Moving on to spring, the main problem that we've had with unviable calves being born. So if you just want to watch this video now, this is a calf, thanks very much to one of my clients for the video, that was born with neurological signs. And this calf was born unassisted, unable to get up by itself, but could get up with assistance, unable to suck by itself, but could suck with assistance. And this is a very typical clinical presentation of a Bluetongue affected calf. Typical dummy calf. This calf was reported, and we would strongly advise or recommend that people report cases because it makes it much easier to see the impact of Bluetongue disease. So this calf was reported and tested, and it did test positive for Bluetongue. Next slide, please. The next slide is quite graphic in case anyone doesn't want to look at it. So this, thanks to the APHA for these slides. These are the typical appearance of a calf that's been affected by Bluetongue in utero, typically mid-gestation, and both show incomplete development of brain tissue. The one on the left is very similar to the brain of the calf that was in the video, where the cerebral hemispheres just haven't developed properly and there's fluid either side of them. And the one on the right is complete hydrancephaly, where the cerebral hemispheres just haven't developed at all and were full of fluid. And these are very typical of infection mid-gestation. So where Bluetongue was in the midges in these cattle in the autumn, moving towards winter. We found that these calves were often the first sign of Bluetongue in a herd because cattle are generally asymptomatic, and these cases can be borne viremic, so are obviously then a source of infection to the midge population and the rest of the herd. Next slide, please. Other issues that we found with these calves that are affected is high levels of pneumonia, probably secondary to aspiration or just lack of colostrum, and central blindness caused by the Bluetongue disease in utero, and then leading to corneal ulceration as the calf's bashing into things because it can't see where it's going. So definitely things that are best avoided if possible. Next slide, please. So there's a great support from AHDB and the Ruminant Health and Welfare on vaccination and should we be vaccinating, and a really good vaccine decision-making tool and cost-benefit analysis on the AHDB Ruminant Health and Welfare website. So initially, vaccine was available to us as a practice in October. We launched a vaccination campaign to protect sheep because there was evidence of severe clinical disease and death on the continent. And then as evidence emerged of the severe effects the Bluetongue was having on cattle production, particularly where scanning results were poor and bulls were becoming infertile, and then high pregnancy losses and spring calving with unviable calves, we really strongly launched a vaccination campaign for cattle as well. And really pleased that we've had a really strong uptake in the eastern region, which I believe has actually meant that we've had considerably fewer cases than expected this summer thus far. Next slide, please. Information about vaccination is readily available. Easily just type Bluetongue vaccination into a search engine. Gives easy access to the Ruminant Health and Welfare website, AHDB and gov.uk. So very easy to find out information, and obviously talk to your vet about vaccination for your herd and your flock. Next slide, please. So which groups and when, oh, next slide, thank you. Which groups and when to vaccinate. So for us, having looked at the evidence, we definitely would recommend vaccinating all sheep with a high mortality and a high morbidity from the virus. Cattle, in our neck of the woods, definitely essential to vaccinate breeding cattle and including bulls. Before we recommended this to our clients, we vaccinated a group of bulls when the vaccine was first available, and semen tested them 2 weeks later to check there was no ill effects on fertility before recommending its use, because its use is off label. But indeed, we did not see any ill effects on fertility using the vaccine. And we now know that many bulls have been vaccinated and are subsequently working well. So for us, we found that's been a very effective thing to do. Ideally, vaccinate before the risk period. That is still now, I mean, the risk continues to increase. The midges are still building up at the moment because temperatures are very warm. So definitely sensible to get protected. And ideally before the animal is pregnant, but that's only just to be sure to protect the pregnancy for the whole of the gestation. We know the vaccine is safe for use in pregnancy. All 3 of the available vaccines are licensed for use in pregnancy, and we've now dispensed many thousands of doses with no side effects reported, very low pharmacovigilance, even from the drug companies. I spoke to all 3 of them this morning just to check, and they've had very few even suspected vaccine reactions reported, and we've seen lots of animals vaccinated at all stages during pregnancy with no ill effects. So happy to say that in our experience, that's the vaccines are very safe and very effective. Next slide, please. Obviously, practicality is an issue. When to do it, how to do it. The vaccines come in some of the vaccines come in relatively large pack sizes. It's obviously important, try not to waste it if possible, and it makes it much more efficient if you can use all the doses in a pack, much more cost efficient. I think in general, once people have sat down and evaluated that it's definitely worth vaccinating, rather than risking getting the disease, then it's actually relatively straightforward to find a way to use the vaccine in the most efficient way. Availability is not a problem. We had real trouble getting hold of some of the vaccine because it went out of stock so quickly in the spring, but I now, again, having spoken to all of the vaccine companies today, there is no problem with availability of the vaccine anymore. I would definitely encourage people to order it in advance, just so there is no issues with availability going forwards. But yeah, as far as I know, there's no restriction on availability at the moment. Movements with vaccines are subject to changing. I know we've just heard a lot about how the movements are moving into Wales. So since the whole of England became a restriction zone, movements from the east are relatively straightforward. So obviously vaccination necessary to move outside the restriction zone. Next slide, please. So we talked to a lot of people about what are the blockers for vaccination, and some people are worried that there might be negative impacts from the vaccine, especially remembering experiences with the Bluetongue 8 vaccine. All vaccines are inactivated vaccines, and their sort of basic components are widely used across vaccinations of all diseases, and they're incredibly safe. So if there's any kind of negative fears about that, I would try and allay them strongly. Definitely a very safe vaccine. Will Bluetongue reach us? Is anybody safe? Well, it certainly reached us. We've responded by vaccination, and I guess it is spreading across the country. I hope people manage to get protected before the disease does reach them. We can conclusively say it doesn't make cows sick. It doesn't cause. Sorry, the vaccine doesn't make cows sick, and the vaccine does not cause ill effects on fertility, most definitely from our experience of many thousands of doses. It's not expensive, especially compared to the effects of the actual disease. And yes, it can be a nuisance to catch and handle animals, but it can often be administered while doing other handling things or with other vaccines according to veterinary advice. So and it's most definitely not too late to start vaccinating now. Next slide, please. So thank you to Hayley Wyton from APHA and Will Stevenson from Three Rivers and Chapelfield Vets for some of their slides that I've used in this presentation. And thank you to Zoe for asking me to talk today, and happy to take any questions at the end.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Laura, for that presentation. You raised some excellent points there with the dummy calves and the fertility issues surrounding infection with Bluetongue. This, to me, really emphasises the importance of having those conversations with your vet and timely vaccination to protect your animals ahead of the breeding season, which is fast approaching. With that in mind, we will now move on to Fiona, who is going to talk through some of her experiences and the challenges around the myths associated with Bluetongue. Thank you very much, Fiona.
Thank you, Zoe. So yes, I thought it would be helpful if I just went through some of the myth busting and the timing sort of thing. So we are having issues, I think, with people reporting cases, and part of that may be that people are concerned that if they report Bluetongue, that they will face extra restrictions. And we know from our impact survey that people found the restrictions last year really arduous, and that might be restricting people from reporting cases. We have to point out Bluetongue is notifiable, and you must report it if you find Bluetongue. If you're in England and you report it to the APHA and they don't suspect any other notifiable diseases, and we do have to remember that Bluetongue could be confused with foot and mouth or other serotypes of Bluetongue. So if they suspect a notifiable disease, they will definitely send somebody and investigate. If they think it's Bluetongue 3, they will give you an authorization code, and this allows your private vet to submit samples to Pirbright for testing up to 3 effective animals. We would really, really encourage people to report Bluetongue if you find it on your farm. It's really, we all need to know what the situation actually is. And there are people saying, oh, maybe it's not as bad as everyone thought it was. Maybe it's not, but if people are not reporting it, then how can we say for sure? There are one of the other myths is, or maybe it's not actually that serious. Maybe there's no need to vaccinate. Having spoken extensively with colleagues on the continent, particularly in the Netherlands, but back for the last 2 years, we did a webinar from the Netherlands. We had farmers in tears as they spoke about the situation on their farm. They lost 10% of their national flock. They had 55,000 animals die over each of the last 2 years. 55,000 sheep died because of Bluetongue 3. And then, as Laura has just explained really clearly, this issue with the dummy calves. So you often don't see clinical signs in cattle at the point that the midges bite the cows. And the first clinical signs are not really obvious in cattle, though they may well have some sort of milk drop. In sheep, there are very severe signs, very sick and very high mortality. So please don't think, oh, it's not something, if you get Bluetongue, you're likely to have very sick, dead sheep. and particularly with cows, you're likely to see an impact further on, where you either have cows not in calf or aborting or producing dummy calves. One thing that farmers often say, oh, it hasn't come to anything, is it really affecting us? And it's just worth pointing out that we do expect low numbers of cases at the beginning of an outbreak, and then there's an increase of numbers a month or two later, because the pressure both in the midges and the virus within the midges build up. So that increase is more dramatic if we have a hot summer, which arguably I'd say we are, and if we don't have high levels of vaccination. And we don't have high levels of vaccination. We have some farmers who are quite rightly have vaccinated and are ahead of the curve. We have a lot of people who are waiting to see. And I personally don't think this is something you can wait and see for. This graph it just shows so this is from WOAH figures across the length of the year, so January to July, total reported cases through Europe very, very low, slightly starts to rise in July, and the increase is then in August. We're only halfway through August now, and we know the UK, it all depends on the number of hot days as a build up to the summer, and we all know Europe is warmer than the UK, so I'm not totally surprised that we're behind Europe for number of cases. So please don't think we're out of the woods just because we haven't yet had a lot of cases reported. This data is from a paper some modelling that they did back in BTD8 back in 2006, 7, 8. You may well remember it. I worked in practice then, and we had farmers say to us, oh, you told us to vaccinate then and it wasn't a problem. Quite honestly, I think it wasn't a problem back then because we all vaccinated really quite effectively, especially down in the southwest. But this modelling still holds. Up in the instance, this is numbers of flocks or herds affected per week, and then along the bottom it's numbers of weeks since the 4th of August. And so that shows this is 4th of August. This model was for 2007. It's the same situation. So that makes here 52 weeks later. This is early August. We're only just starting to see cases. This is early October, and that's when the cases build up. So please don't think just because we haven't seen a lot of disease up to now that we're not going to see it. Interestingly, the top graph is the situation if nobody vaccinated. The lower graph is if 50% of farms vaccinated. I don't think we're anywhere near that in the UK. I don't think we have 50% of coverage, and to get good herd immunity, to get to suppress the disease, we need a lot of animals vaccinated. I'm still scared of Bluetongue and what might happen. As we go on to the myths, and Laura covered this really clearly, so I can go through this quite quickly. But there is this myth out there, you see it on social media, that if you vaccinate bulls and rams, it will make them infertile. There is absolutely zero evidence to suggest that. Laura, they did a clinical trial on their own farm and showed no difference in bull fertility following vaccination. We know that there are no reports of vaccination causing infertility. There are plenty of reports of disease causing infertility. So it is really important people vaccinate before the virus arrives on your farm and before the start of your breeding season. And this is pretty much the same myth, infertility in cattle and sheep. Again, no evidence that the vaccine causes a negative effect, but lots of incidents that the disease affects fertility, causes abortions, causes dummy calves. And so exactly the same message, vaccinate before the virus arrives and before the start of the breeding season. So, and then the last thing Laura also said about this, that myth is you can't vaccinate pregnant animals against Bluetongue. There is no truth to that. It's absolutely okay to give any of the Bluetongue vaccines to pregnant animals. However, we know, and I'll say as soon as the tups are going out to people, you do want to, at the point the ram or the bull goes out into the ewes or the cows, it is sensible to avoid overly handling stock in that period immediately after breeding has started. So for us, for a sheep flock, it would be 6 weeks, because the ram has just served the ewes, the embryos are implanting, you don't want to do stressful things. It's not because it's a Bluetongue vaccine, it's any handling stress. I wouldn't recommend people dose their animals then, or bolus them, or anything in that crucial 6 weeks. So for that reason, yes, it's okay, the vaccine is safe for pregnancy, but do be sensible when you've just turned your bull or your ram out to allow implantation of embryos. This is just people who say, oh, is it too late to vaccinate Bluetongue now? Just made up this very, very simple tool based on an Excel sheet, and we will share this on the Ruminant Health and Welfare group with all our other, our vaccine tool, comparison of vaccines. There are a number of resources that we have produced, and this is very simple. It asks you the question, and the date in yellow is for each farmer or vet to fill in with the farmer. What date are you putting the tups in with the ewes? Fill it in, 10-10, 10th of October. And that will then tell you the last date to give the dose of vaccine to sheep on that farm. So you have still got time. If you're not putting your tups out for the 10th of October, you still have time to vaccinate. And then there's equally, we've made another little tool for the date that your bull goes in with your cows. So for example, in this example, the bull goes in on the 30th of September. So then it will just work out with you. It's really simple, but it just tells you what is a week before that point. I've checked this with all the vaccine companies. Vaccinating a week before tupping or breeding is okay. Do try not to be handling the animals that 6 weeks immediately after bull or ram's been put in. But anyway, this really simple tool will be available if you want to use it. Just note, and this will be relevant for next year, for example, most countries, when they get Bluetongue, they need to be vaccinating for 2 or 3 years. This is not something that we're going to deal with this year. So even if you are too late for this year, and I don't believe most people are as yet, we will need to be thinking of it going forward. The Netherlands, who've had 2 very bad years, have not yet reported a case this year. They've well vaccinated and they've had a lot of coverage of the virus. So you do come out of it, but it's not going to be a short thing, I'm afraid. That's me, Zoe.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you very much, Fiona. I do appreciate the question of whether to vaccinate and when can be a really difficult decision, especially as we are very aware of all the misinformation out there about Bluetongue and the vaccines, which both you and Laura have covered really, really well. I should add that all these myth-busting graphics are available on the AHDB and Ruminant Health and Welfare websites as well, if you wish to revisit them or would like to share them with anyone else. Fiona also tied in there the importance of ordering your vaccine soon if you wish to vaccinate and protect your breeding animals before the breeding season. It is not too late to vaccinate. However, if you are considering vaccination, please do speak with your vet and have this conversation sooner rather than later. So here I just wanted to highlight that we have our next webinar on the 3rd of September, 5 till 6 p.m. This will consist of a Scotland update in light of the changes coming into place in September. I'm conscious of time, so if there are any questions that we don't have time to get answered on this webinar, they will still be gathered and we will ensure they get answered on the next one. On the topic of questions, we also have a new question submission form available on the AHDB Webinars page and through the QR code here on screen. This allows you to submit questions for future webinars, and there are also some useful contacts and resources available via this form too. If I could have the next slide, please. There is also lots of additional support available to you if you are struggling or know of someone who is. These organisations are also available on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website for you to find out more. And then could I have the final slide, please? And lastly, this has been an industry initiative, and I would just like to say a huge thank you to all who have helped communicate the importance of vaccination and really helped to protect our national herds and flocks. All of your support has been incredibly vital in getting the resources out there and in helping farmers with a decision on whether to vaccinate or not. Right, we will move on to some questions now. So if I could ask all the speakers to come back on screen, please. Brilliant, lovely. Thank you very much. So we have a question here about what do farmers do about reporting Bluetongue vaccination in lambs not yet tagged. We mentioned there possibly some underreporting, and reporting is incredibly important. So perhaps this is one for you, Gordon. How do farmers report vaccination in lambs not tagged?
I mean, I think possibly defer to Fiona first in terms of the age of a lamb that can be vaccinated. But I think in most cases, if it's old enough to vaccinate, it's old enough to tag. And so we would urge you to tag it and report it using that, because otherwise you have no official record of that lamb being vaccinated. There's no, it won't go with it on its journey. You won't be able to know for sure whether it's had its booster jabs, etc. So I'd say, you really should tag that lamb.
And I understood that's
it is a requirement. Yes,
I'm afraid, of the vaccine. They have to be individually identified. Every animal that's vaccinated has to be individually ID'd, as far as I understand. So I'm afraid they do have to be tagged to vaccinate. I agree with Gordon.
A slaughter tag is not a barrier, because there is a unique number on a slaughter tag. Even though you can't read it from the ear tag, it's still got a unique number, a unique chip, and that's the one that you use to record. So you'd obviously need a scanner, clearly, but a wand.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Gordon and Fiona there. We've got another question here, and I believe this was pretty well covered in Laura and Fiona's presentations there. But other than what is listed on the vaccine data sheets, has there been any other documented negative side effects of vaccination?
No, certainly not as far as I know or in our experience, that it's been very, very well tolerated.
Mm-hmm. And absolutely millions of doses of vaccine have been used in Europe. So there are we have a lot of experience collectively across Europe of these vaccines. So that there isn't anything that I'm concerned about in using the vaccine. I'm much more worried about the disease.
Absolutely, absolutely. Brilliant. And we've also got another question here. Is the movement of hay and straw throughout the country and across borders a risk regarding transfer? That's an interesting one. Does anyone?
I did speak to a European, I can't remember, one of the conferences, and there is apparently somebody who's done some work looking at midges in bunches of flowers, and they could not transfer bunches of flowers and get a live midgie at the end of it. It's a bit anecdotal, so apologies, but I do not think that is the biggest thing we have to worry about. I would be much more concerned about moving infected animals or the midge, the midge itself, and then we know that they can fly 20k and they can be we know they can move on the wind and stuff. So I don't necessarily think that's a massive problem. I don't know. The other two might have views.
No, I'd agree. I think definitely animal movements, and I think the midges can be blown up to 150k, can't they? And so yeah, they could they could probably go faster than the hens, sure. So
I mean, I don't
Absolutely.
think there's always a theoretical pathway, isn't there? There's a theoretical pathway. The midge can be, sitting in someone's car driving around, but absolutely the method of spread is germinal products, live animals.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. I am conscious we are on time now, but I will continue with a few more questions because there are a few more in the question box. Are needles an issue in spreading the virus if the virus has hit the herd or flock? The risk
Yes.
of sharing needles
Yes.
there.
If you have a viremic animal and you're sharing needles between them, then you can mechanically transmit the virus. So the rules on the vaccine are a separate needle for every dose, and they are sticking to that quite strictly in some countries. Practically speaking, if you're vaccinating thousands of sheep, people would like, that's another good reason to vaccinate definitely before you have the virus and not in the midst of it. I think now we are all potentially in the midst of there being virus around, so arguably a belt and braces person would use separate needles. So,
Yeah. No, thank you, Fiona. We've also got another one here talking about the movement from England to Wales. So thinking about moving sheep from England to Wales, does one dose or one vaccination count as fully vaccinated?
Is that for me, Zoe?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can take that, Steve.
One dose for sheep counts as fully vaccinated, but they must observe, the period for the onset of immunity as well. So 21 to 28 days, I think, depending on the vaccine. But I'm happy to be corrected by the vet.
I was just thinking, presumably it depends on the type of vaccine, does it, Steve? So two of the vaccines, a single dose in sheep counts as that's what the SPC is, and with the vaccine that requires 2 doses in sheep, presumably fully vaccinated requires both of those doses to have been given, I'd imagine, does it?
yeah, I would agree. I think according to the data sheet, basically depending on
The
which
full
vaccine
course of
is
the
used
vaccine
would make
plus the
sense.
21 days or 28 days, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so it is very vaccine specific.
Brilliant. And then there is another question here. Why are sheep not allowed to just be vaccinated? I.e., why do they have to be tested despite vaccination with regards to cross-border movements?
I think Steve's just announced his amended policy, hasn't he? But it's because none of the vaccines offer guaranteed period of immunity or reduce viremia, or prevent viremia. So that's why they're required to be tested. And it's only one of the vaccines that for cattle as well that has a claim for preventing viremia. So it's only that one that doesn't need to be tested currently.
Brilliant. And we also do have a question here. I think this one's one I can cover. How can I download the recording of the webinar after it ends? I'd be very happy if I get some access of the recording. Yep, so you will get an email out after this webinar within the next 24 hours with the recording. Alternatively, it will also be posted on YouTube as well, so you will also be able to access the recording from there. There's another question here. More important to us is time or stage of gestation when cattle are infected. We have vaccinated all breeding stock. Do we need a booster next year? Will we have any degree of immunity? We are considering changing calving date to change period when gestating animals are most at risk. Would anyone like, there's a couple of questions within there. Would anyone like to take that one?
Yeah, so the vaccine companies, nobody has yet fully described when the revaccination interval for the vaccines is. But both Boehringer, who make Bull-Tavo, and Virbac, who make Cybazole, have both said their duration of immunity is expected to be a year, and that is based on other vaccines that they make in the same way, and kind of initial trials. But they're expecting to announce that sort of later in the summer, in the next few months, when they've been able to do the immunity studies. But so yes, it's generally accepted, I think, at the moment, that the vaccine interval for revaccination is going to be 12 months, and that the vaccine should cover reasonably well for that 12-month period. I think if you haven't yet vaccinated, making sure that you do get them vaccinated as soon as possible is essential, and then hopefully it will protect the pregnancies for as soon as possible.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Laura. We've also got a question in here about following a positive case. So please, can you clarify the likely chain of events if a Bluetongue positive animal is identified in England, and if this differs in Scotland and Wales regarding the restrictions, culling, compensation, and if this differs depending on if the affected animal was brought in from the restricted zone or not. I know, Steve, you did cover this quite well in your presentation. Would you like to cover this one?
Well, I mean, Gordon will cover the policy in England, but Wales is still Bluetongue free at the moment. So as I said, our primary response would be to try and eradicate the disease, particularly if it was a moved-in animal, vaccinated or not. Then obviously epi investigations would be undertaken to see if the disease was circulating in the rest of the herd flock and the local midges. If it was circulating in local midges, I guess we would declare an RZ or something if it was close to the border. But I think we would have to really consider our action if disease was found to be circulating, as I said, in West Wales, and there was no obvious cause through animal movement or something. It was midge circulation. I think that would be difficult for us, and would probably indicate that the game is up really for disease management in Wales, or active disease management like we're doing now. But I'll let Gordon come in and explain the approach in England.
I mean, I think Fiona covered it in her myth busting, but in England, we don't cull, we don't place the animal under restriction, we don't place the premises under restriction. Clearly, that animal can't move to Wales or Scotland because it's positive, and there are some restrictions from Wales and Scotland in terms of how soon it could be retested in order to then move. But from England, it can move around. Clearly, if there is some, if it were a bull and you were sampling it because you were wanting to collect germinal products, etc., then you wouldn't be allowed to sample those, freeze those germinal products. But as a generality, there is no restrictions on those animals, and we would absolutely please report them. It's important that we all know the geographic spread of this. People could be sitting there thinking that they're safe, but they're not, because someone's just not reported it from just up the road, and then in the next cycle of that extrinsic incubation period, a whole load of midges there, and get it. It's vaccinate soon, as soon as you can, I think would be my message.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Gordon. And just to move on to our last question here, if a sheep was vaccinated on the 20th of September, it still couldn't move to Wales for 21 to 28 days, depending on the brand of vaccine. And if it was vaccinated last year, what's the accepted vaccine duration of action for entry to Wales?
Oh, that's a good question. So I guess we would expect it to be vaccinated according to the data sheet for the vaccine, but as far as I'm aware, and I think the vets have said that there are no kind of revaccination schedules available at the moment, but immunity or vaccine effect is expected to last a year. So I think we would be more comfortable if it was revaccinated after 12 months. And as I've said before, we wouldn't want the animal, or the animal shouldn't move until it has, been fully vaccinated and it's had that period for the onset of immunity.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve. Right, that's all. I believe that's all the questions. If we have missed any, please still send them to us, and we will try to get them answered. You can submit them through the form or through the email on the Ruminant Health and Welfare website. I would really like to thank Steve, Laura, Fiona, and Gordon for joining us tonight and helping with the Q&A session as well at the end, as well as the events and comms team for your help in preparation for this webinar. And of course, thank you all very, very much for joining, and I hope you all have a lovely evening.
Thanks, Zoe.
Thank you.